Hello. So recently, in the wake of the release of several major mods, including and most prominently Sire's Make Me Real, but also including stuff like Danny Judas's Miami Horror, a lot of people have been asking about interface, because both those games do interesting things with the interfaces that I think are very commendable. So basically, in this video, all I'll be doing is I'll be going through the Hotline Miami source code and basically running through the primary script that controls the interface and describing a bunch of things so people can get a better idea for it. So I'm currently using the Hotline Miami Studio build created by Tony um, from the Hotline Miami subreddit. I'll post a link in the description of this video. But essentially, it's Hotline Miami converted for Studio for Game Maker Studio. I don't really know what else to say about that. It's a very good conversion, and it should be running out of the box, but I did do a couple of modifications just for optimization purposes, but I'm not sure if those actually matter. So, anyways, um, to start off, the first thing we want to do is we want to open Object Effector, as I already have it open here. Object Effector is, in case you don't know or don't remember, the object which controls the cursor and, for all intents and purposes, the rest of the heads-up display. Now, we want to go into the draw function of Object Effector and into the code of that. Now you'll see all this stuff, but basically what we want to focus on is something called script score draw story. And if you haven't formatted the code, there should be line 70 out of 132. The rest of the stuff pertains to essentially Xbox controls, uh, the shift factor, and specific instances where arrows are drawn. But specifically for the heads-up display, you want to find a script called script score draw story, and I recommend renaming this to something like script draw HUD, because script score draw story is just a really bad name that doesn't tell you much of anything. So now let's actually go to the script itself, and remember to rename the actual script so you don't get errors. So the first thing I'm going to do, because this is currently very, well, it's not formatted in the slightest, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go paste it into a beautifier. Now the beautifier that I use is something called, is at a JS beautifier, or you could just type in JS beautifier into the into Google or something, and it should be the first link. And basically what this will do is clean up your code for you, or it'll clean up the code at least visually as such. So you just copy and paste this in, and it'll automatically format it, which makes it much more legible. So from the top, alright, I'm just going to go through and comment this, and let me make the font bigger so you can see. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we're just going to go through and figure out what each basically section of this does. So the first thing we want to look at is this D-theory Set Projection Ortho. You don't have to worry about this. Basically what this does is it's beginning to start, it's drawing a orthographic projection using 3D functions, which essentially just stretches the, or for lack of a better, or in every practical purpose, what it does is it just stretches the display to the full screen width. So to the view width, which is for all intents and purposes is screen width. So just ignore that line. Alright, now the first thing you're going to see is if global.combo is greater than 0, and if we use the scoping, we can trace this down to here. Now, this should be pretty self-explanatory. If the combo is greater than 0, now the next thing we see is if global combo time is greater than 120. Global.combo time, as you may imagine, is the timer which controls basically the combo time down, or the combo run out. So 120 here is the maximum value. 120 is counted in frames. So that's, if we're assuming the game runs at 60 frames per second, that should be around 2 seconds. So what this function is doing is, if the combo timer has reached its maximum, which is 120, or around 2 seconds, cap the combo timer at 120. So basically, if it's greater than this, then you want to cap it at that. Now, next thing is a sort of a, it's a bit more complicated, so we'll take this one step at a time. If the combo timer is greater than 0, here, we want to gradually depreciate it every step. And what this does is essentially it ensures that it basically causes the rundown. And this function right here specifically pertains to the mask. I think it's Zack the Frog that extends the combo. So what this is basically saying is, if Zack the Frog is selected as a mask, add 0.25 to the combo. So basically what this is doing is the net sum, if you add these two together, this -1 for every step and this plus 25 for every step, you get a slightly slower depreciation rate of 0.75 as opposed to 1. So Zack's combo expires 75% slower than, or 25% slower, sorry, than the normal. You can set this to any number. Don't set it greater than 0, because otherwise the combo will actually go up and you'll be gaining time. But yeah, this is pretty incidental. I wouldn't worry about this. To raise the combo time, increase this number. I should probably add that. Okay, so now this is the other section. So if the global combo is greater than 0, we're still assuming the combo is greater than 0. So now we're checking to see if the combo is greater than 1. This will begin our combo timer because, you know, there's always an assumed default of basically a one-hit combo. So here we're just going to be adding scores. I'm not going to really go into the details of this because this is kind of mathematically. This is basically, this mathematical model follows the one that is present in Hotline Miami 1, and I'm just going to leave it at this. I mean, I'm going to assume that nobody has access to Steam, and therefore these achievements won't matter. But let's just say combo score. Now, the one thing that somebody might potentially have interest in are these values here. What these essentially do is they create points. So in Hotline Miami, you have these sort of floating points that appear above each character, or above each kill, sorry. And what these essentially do is they serve as a visual indicator of your point values. Now, these, in specific for this incident, these serve as the points that display after a combo is finished. So hence, that's why, you know, after your combo expires, you get this thing that pops up with your combo number. So X combo plus the string, which is basically your current combo multiplied by several values into a score. And this will give you your score at the end of the value. So if there's any, I don't know why you would change this, but if there's any reason why you wouldn't want this, you can just delete all of this. So all of this. If you don't want it to add to your score. If you don't want the pop to appear, you would just delete this. The rest of this you don't have to worry about. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is drawing the score, and that starts here. So what these functions essentially do is okay, so there's two main variables here. There's global.drawScore and global.myScore. Global.draw score is a temporary variable, and this is constantly incrementing, which means it's increasing by certain values. Global.myScore is the final score, and this is universally displayed. What this essentially means is global.drawScore is a temporary container which basically allows this effect where it can show points being added to your score. So let's say you get 1 kill and you get 1,000 points for that. Rather than just popping directly to 1,000, it will basically increment by a certain number. So you'll see, you know, plus 10, plus 20, plus 30, whatever, until it gets up to 1,000 and makes for this cool sort of slot machine effect. So that's essentially what this is doing. The first thing it's doing is it's checking to see if the draw score is less than your current score. The draw score will always start at something like, both will always start at 0 because you always start with a score of 0. But each time it auto increments, it'll stop at the current score. So let's say you kill one enemy, get 1,000 points. Draw score will be captured as 1,000. Then you kill another enemy. Now you have 2,000 points. Now global.myScore is 2,000. This is 1,000, but it has to catch up. So basically, it has this variable called update. And update works basically when you want global.drawScore to update, update will be active, but otherwise it won't be active. That should be pretty obvious. So now we get into the actual mathematical logistics of it. If the draw score is less than your total score minus 1,000, then you want to add 500. Now, Hotline Miami 1, at least I know, uses sort of ludicrous scores, so you can get into like the hundreds of thousands, possibly even the millions. I can't really remember. So 1,000 is a relatively small number here comparatively. But if you, for whatever reason, you want to have smaller numbers or you're using smaller pools of points, you could modify these values to sort of just adjust. And essentially what this sort of these nested if loops are doing is the closer you get to the number, the sort of the smaller the additive range is. I'm not really going to go into the mathematics of that, but if you're interested, you can just try messing with these values. Although I'm not sure why you would. Alright. Again, we see the update here. Update just means that the score is updating, so you don't have to worry about that. Alright, now we get into the actual interface itself, which is where our primary interest is in. So the first thing you see is this this variable called score string. Score string controls what's being drawn when the points appear. So you have global.drawScore again, so we just define it here, plus PTS, which is points. This is a concatenated string. If you don't know what that is, read a basic programming like primer or something. Alright, then you have two colors. Sorry. Then you have two colors here. The way the colors work in Hotline Miami, or the way the colors are defined rather in Hotline Miami, is a bit complicated. I'm not going to go into the sort of what's going. I'm not really going to go into what's going on here, but essentially what these are doing is they're merging two colors with a sort of a flickering effect, which is controlled by dir plus equals 1 plus update times 7. This is rather highly insular and specific stuff. So all I'm going to say is these colors affect the flickering effect of the score draw. Change them if you want to. So just mess around with them if you want to do that. Okay, so now we get into ammo. So this is drawing the ammo display. Alright, don't worry about these. These are just basically used for spatial arrangement. Show ammo is important because this will basically dictate whether or not the ammo counter appears. Now we have this long list of, well, somewhat long list of weapons. So what's going on here is we're initializing weapons. The first thing we're doing is we're checking to see if the player exists, and if we follow the scoping, this goes on pretty long. So check to see if the player exists. If the player exists, then we want to display ammo if the player is holding something. So these will go through. Sorry, this is in the wrong place. So each one of these things will basically get looped through these if-else statements, and they'll check to see first the sprite. So basically in Hotline Miami 1, the primary sprites you'll be dealing with are the walking sprite and the attacking sprite. For some of them, there's a no. The only exception there is for the double barrel, which uses 2 attacking animations. Otherwise, there's no exceptions. So these will always be in the format if the player sprite is X walking or X attacking, where X is the weapon. Then you want to show the ammo. You want to show the ammo counter, which is show ammo equals 1. And you want to set the maximum ammo possible. So this is what the max ammo is. Basically, if you have a weapon you want to declare a maximum value for, or maximum ammo count for, you're gonna want to put it here. So let's say, well, I'm not gonna define a new weapon, but let's say we want to change the M16 into something else, like say a handgun or something, and the maximum magazine size of the handgun is 13. If we change this value to 13, then the maximum value which will be displayed in the HUD will be 13, and this will also affect the ultimate ammo count, since the ammo is regulated primarily through here. We're not going to change that for now, we'll just keep it the same. And you just want to follow the format of this, so if you want to add a new weapon, just copy and paste that. Now this goes on for a little bit, and this contains the display of it. So this contains the contents of the ammo, basically the ammo display. So if show ammo equals 1, if we are actually showing a display, we want the ammo string, which is the current display for the weapons ammo, to be the string. So basically the amount of bullets the player has, object player.ammo, converted to a string, which is what this is doing, concatenated with a slash, just for formatting, plus the maximum ammo. So once again, we dictated here the maximum ammo of a weapon, plus RNDS. So what this will come out looking like is current ammo divided by total ammo RNDS. For example, let's say for the M16 we have 16 out of 24 rounds. This is what that's going to appear like. Now you can easily modify this to be a number of other things. I know a lot of people get rid of the RNDS and replace it, or they just get rid of it altogether. You can do a lot with this. You can even do stuff like you can replace you can insert, for example, an image here. So if you have like for Midnight Animal, what I did was I used a weapon icon, and so what I did was I did a draw sprite here, and I did a draw sprite here, and essentially that means that this would also be drawn within here. So you really anything that you want to draw, for example, within the show ammo, within the ammo display, is going to be put here and in one other place below. So this is so the next thing we want to take a look at is what happens if we don't have the show ammo display. Now, if the player does not, okay, well, we established earlier that show ammo it does not exist by default, and it only exists when the player is holding a weapon. So here we want to display what happens with no weapon selected, or rather no firearm selected. So the first thing we want to do is we want to display the empty string. Hotline Miami 1 uses no gun. You can change this to whatever you want. A lot of people have changed this to blank, and that seems to be the preferable and stylish option, but you can change it to whatever, whatever suits your fancy. This is just, once again, text formatting, so don't worry about that. Alright, the next thing we're taking a look at here is the exact same thing for the biker. The biker uses throwing knives in Hotline Miami 1, oh, and also in Hotline Miami 2, but in Hotline Miami 1, the biker uses throwing knives and starts with 3 throwing knives. And once those throwing knives are used, it displays no knives. This follows the exact same logic as before, only now it's checking to see if the biker exists and not the not jacket. So this is a same logic for the bikers throwing knives. Okay, so the next thing we want to take a look at is the score draw, or not the score draw, but the basically the values that are drawn when the chapter is done. So I think both Hotline Miami 1 and 2, after the level is complete, they display something in the lower left corner or wherever the ammo is drawn. That's something like, return to car. And Hotline Miami 1 here flashes the score. So this basically shows post-combat results / prompts. Global.done controls whether or not, or it doesn't control it, it measures whether or not the level has been completed. And when I say a level, I mean the entire level, not just one floor. So 1 means completed, 0, which is default, uncompleted. Now you have a couple of variables here. You have a couple of new ones at least. You have show finished, and actually that's the only one. I'm just stupid. Alright, so show finished is a timer variable that's tied to basically alternating text displays. So show finished is on a 0 to 240 basis, it appears, and 240, once again, if we think about the room and steps, that's about 4 seconds. So if show finished is greater than 0, once again, this is because this is a familiar function that we've covered before. I'm not going to comment on it really, at least leaving a comment. If show finished is greater than 0, basically if show finished has a value, then decrement by 1. This is basically a countdown. Otherwise, if it's at 0, reset it to 240. So this basically the cycle constantly loops. So this is a looping cycle for show finished. Now this basically splits the alternating text display, this following value. So if we think about 240, half of 240 is 120, but because we're using a greater, or because we're using a less than and not, for example, less than equal to, we're using 121 instead of 120. Actually, you know what? Whatever. I'm not going to comment. Basically, once we reach the halfway point, or if we're underneath the halfway point, we want to display the user's or the player's score. So the first half of this is the score, which is in the format you got XXXX points, as shown here. Once again, a concatenation using a string conversion. Now the other thing we do is in the second half, actually for the first half would be 0 to 120. The second half would be 121 to 240. So is the phrase chapter done, as demonstrated here. Once again, you can switch this to anything you want. If you don't want it to alternate display at all, get rid of all of this. If you don't want to, if you want it to say something else, switch these values. If you don't want it to alternate, but you want to display static string, delete everything. Oh, and I should clarify that this is the score string. So the score string is actually the score, which I believe is I think top right corner of the screen. So I should clarify for the score. This is the ammo. The ammo counter will be set to go to car by default if you're playing as jacket, or if you're playing as biker, or rather if it's checking to see if the biker object exists, it'll say go to bike because the biker drives a bike, not a car. You can change this to whatever you want. Hotline Miami 2 uses leave the area. So once again, your imagination. And once again, this is text formatting. Now, if we look at the scope of this, once again, we'll see that all this is assuming the player exists or the player object exists. Well, what if the player object doesn't? Well, that means that one of two things: either the player is dead or we fucked up the programming. I'm going to assume you don't do the latter. So ideally, if the player doesn't exist, if the player doesn't exist, which is what basically the underlying assumption of this else is, and if the player is dead, which is indicated by the existence of obj player dead, you want the score string, the score display displays you're dead. Upper right hand corner, you're dead. Once again, changes to anything. This is basically this is a little bit more interesting. It introduces the global, basically the global keys. Now you have two keys. You have or you have two variables really. You have global.xbox and global.restart key. So global.xbox equals 0 basically is, as you can imagine, it's measuring the existence, or in this case, the non-existence of the Xbox controller. So if the Xbox controller is plugged in, and yeah, this is the Xbox controller, Hotline Miami 1, at least in this build, does not support any other controllers, is not plugged in. The ammo displays restart key plus restart key to restart. Now, you're wondering, where is the global.restart key? What is the global.restart key? Well, this is a variable that basically is initiated in the when the player enters the value. The default is R. So if we look at the locations of where that is, we'll see. Okay, we'll see that there are two main locations where it is basically instantiated. The first place is in the title sequence, where it's loaded as global.restart key equals R. And you can see here some other keys that are loaded. And the second place it's instantiated in is object show controls. This is a bit more complicated. This is where you're allowed to, or the player is allowed to edit the controls and bind custom keys, which are then saved. By default, this settles on R. Don't worry about this unless for whatever reason you're deciding to change the default key, in which case you go to object title, although I highly do not recommend that. Anyhow, now assuming that the Xbox controller is not plugged in, you wanted to say press R to restart, or you wanted to give the keyboard prompts. Otherwise, display start, or I'm just going to copy this. Display start to restart, because start is what the Xbox controller apparently uses for the restart button. And once again, this is just text format. Ignore finish equals 0. Alright, now we're going to get into something a bit more specific. This is tutorial controls. So, traditionally in Hotline Miami, these displays are shown in in the train station level, in the prelude, which is the metro. If you also want to include a tutorial level of sorts, you can modify this script in several ways to basically create this tutorial text that pops up at the bottom. Now, there are a couple of ways, there are a couple of things to do here, and there's a bunch of stuff to unpack. So I'm not going to go into, or I would not like to go into like super detail about this. Basically, I'm just going to talk about the structure of this, what's going on, and essentially what's happening in terms of the logic. And I'll leave it up to you to sort of figure out the minutia of it. So don't worry about finish. Once again, we're checking to see if we have an Xbox controller. If not, then we want to give the keyboard prompt. Now, this is just checking. This is just in the incidence of whether the player exists. These are all assuming that these are all only being shown when the player exists. So once again, assuming the player is not dead. Now there are more, I guess, less, or there are more specific things we can sort of specify in terms of displaying certain controls when certain things have been interacted with. For example, if a weapon exists, so a weapon being anything that's sort of either a weapon that's being thrown or a weapon that's just lying on the ground or a weapon that an enemy has dropped, doesn't matter. We want to create a specific prompt specifically for the weapon in the event that a weapon does exist. So basically, let's say you knock down the first guy by the door, he drops a baseball bat. You want to, the player otherwise has no idea what to do, so you want to give them an instruction to pick up the weapon. So here you go. You want to check first to see whether the object that prompts this exists, and then you want to show the instruction. Now this, because GameMaker is basically processed from the top to the bottom in terms of like code order, this will be processed after this, so it's safe, at least in terms of order. So, okay, so you have your weapon prompt here. Now let's say the player is unarmed. So you check to see if the sprite index is unarmed or is punching, which is unarmed. Now, if you're on Xbox, once again, you want to basically alternate between these two things. You want to alternate between left trigger and right mouse and left button and shift. Basically what this is doing is, you see how you have this string here? Well, since this is being drawn lower in the order, this is gonna be ignored. So otherwise, if you just had, for example, this, it would only show this and it wouldn't show this anymore. But instead you want to show them both. So what you can do is you can have it basically switch between the two by using an else statement. So if room, train station downstairs, so this is the first level of the metro. You basically want to instruct the player on how to pick up and throw, or here just throw weapons. Now by the second stage, you assume that they already know how to do that, so you go back to telling them how to aim. Actually, now that I think of it, that's kind of a weird tutorial sequence, but I'm not going to bother questioning it. Anyways, the final thing that's done here is if it checks to see if there is an enemy that's been knocked out or incapacitated, and then it just teaches you how to do ground kills. So all this is pretty internally consistent in terms of logic. If you just take a look at it, it should make more sense. But you can basically modify these to do anything you want. You can put them in any room you want just with these. You can even create entirely new, I guess, categories for them. So for example, if I want something to show in like room, I don't know, room house 1, you would do if room house 1 equals whatever, and you would do finish string equals this if this is in existence. Okay, so that finishes up the logic of it. Now we just want to do the actual drawing of the thing. So this basically draws all the things graphically. This is sort of a very subjective field in terms of where things are placed, how visual styles work, and as this video is to instruct you on the actual programming behind it and help you understand the programming and not help you become a better visual designer, I'm not going to go into or cast my judgments upon what you decide to do with this information. And instead, I'm just going to go over how the structure works. You're responsible for anything you do, good or bad. So draw HUD. Okay, first thing you want to do, first thing that's happening is it's basically doing this thing where it's checking to see if the score is updating, because remember, up here we declared that if update is equal to 0, up here, yes, if draw score is under my score, then you want it to update, otherwise you don't want it to update. What this is doing is it's checking to see if the score is updating, then you want it to be font score. If it's not updating, then you want it, or if it is updating, you want it to be font score update. If it's not updating, you want it to be font score. This can have a potentially cool effect if the fonts are done right. I haven't played the game in a while, but I think in Hotline Miami, font score is just as solid, and font score update is just as outlined. And this makes for sort of a cool effect where after the score starts counting, you get this sort of ringed effect that goes into a solid, that fills in solid. But yeah, I don't know, that's just a very specific thing. You may not want that in which case you just can get rid of that entirely. Now, Hotline Miami does something I personally hate, which is it draws black rectangles behind its text. And this is exactly what it's doing. Draw a black rectangle behind the score. Now, this again draws another black rectangle behind the MO. And these are, once again, both positioned. I'll talk about that in a little bit. If finish equals 1, finish being the tutorial text, I don't know why it's called finished, draw black rectangle behind the tutorial text. Okay, now that we're done with that, we get another and apparently redundant repeat of the update script, which I'm not going to question. I'm just going to get rid of that. You don't have to get rid of it, but Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to actually start drawing text. So, the first thing you want to do is you want to set the font. I don't know why the font's being declared up there, but let's move this down here just for consistency's sake. Okay, the first thing you want to do is you want to set the color. Now, you might be asking, what is color 1? Well, color 1 is actually defined up here. Up here. Yes, here. Okay. Now, we declared these colors a while back and didn't use them. Now, this is kind of just shoddy practice now that I think about it, but just for the sake of preserving the original structure of the document. Color 1 is some blend of aqua, fuchsia, and maroon. So it's, I don't know what that looks like. But this is the lighter color, this is the darker color. No, excuse me, this is the lighter color, this is the darker color. Color 2 is lighter, color 1 is darker. Let's note that down. So, we're going to start by drawing the foreground. So once again, GameMaker processes code from top to bottom. So therefore, you want to start with the basically we're going to start with the lighter color here. So this is actually drawing the foreground text. Let me note this better. And this is drawing the score. Now, you may be asking about the actual positioning here, and I'll talk about the positioning right now, actually. So how Hotline Miami uses positioning is it bases it on around the view. Now, in Studio, there's a probably better function called display get GUI with, or basically display get GUI, and then this is width, or this is height. Those must be used though in the draw GUI event. Now see here we have this draw, well you can actually change it to draw GUI, which irrevocably fucks up a lot of things with at least this script. But just know that that is an alternative, and you can read up on the documentation which explains it better. If you have any questions about that, let me know if you're interested in converting to that. But for now, we're just going to use, we're going to draw based on the view. The view being essentially what is being drawn to the screen, so the area being that you want to be drawn to the screen. So what we're doing is for the X value, for the score, because it's around the top right corner, we're taking the view, the edge of the view, so the full width of the view, minus 18, which is like this, minus the string width of the score. Now this is important because you want it to dynamically shift with the score itself. Times 0.05 plus this sort of, basically what this does is it causes to waver around. This is once again a Hotline Miami specific thing. If you want to get rid of the inconstant waver, get rid of this. That's the X, so that places it around here, but we haven't moved the Y yet. So the funny thing about Hotline Miami is that, or not Hotline Miami, the funny thing about GameMaker is that while the X axis is fairly ordinary in terms of its layout, so you would assume, you know, positive values go here, negative values go here. The Y axis is actually it's inverted, or it's inverted at least according to common expectations. So typically in 7th grade geometry class, they'll teach you that the y-axis, the farther up you go towards 90 degrees, the higher you go. So basically, the more positive you become, and conversely, towards 270 degrees, that's where you start to get more negative. But in GameMaker, it's actually reversed. Now, there's a number of reasons behind this, of which I'm not going to get into. If you're curious, you can read up on the documentation for it. But in GameMaker, in order a positive direction indicates downward movement, a negative indicates upwards. This took me a while to get used to. It might take you some time to get used to. It might not. I'm just horrible at math, so maybe this is just one of those things. Anyways, 20. This basically means, try to imagine like this. If 0 is the very, very top of the screen, 20 is 20 units down from that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, all the way down to 20. So we want this places us somewhere near the top of the screen, and once again we have this waver effect. This is rotation, and that's all we really need to worry about. Now, the next thing we're going to draw is we want to draw the tutorial text. So once again, going by the very strange name of finish string, this is being placed at view W view, so the view width divided by 2, so that places us in the center, and then view H view, which is the height of the thing, minus 11, which is somewhere down here, which puts us right where we want to be, which is kind of like where the subtitles are usually drawn in a film or something. And we only want this to display if we allow it to display. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to draw the ammo. I've been conveniently ignoring this ammo Y, ammo X stuff for a bit throughout this because these are essentially what these are essentially are modifiers that are used to control the well, I've been using text formatting, but essentially the spatial orientation of these values. So ammo Y starts off -32, or ammo Y starts off screen, so it'll be somewhere all the way down here. And what it does is it'll float upwards. This is a value that's controlled by a number of shifters, these arithmetic sort of things like this, which I'm not going to go into, but if you're curious about that, mess around with the values once again. Essentially, anyways, what this is doing is it's moving ammo Y up the screen. So if we think about this mathematically, if ammo Y is greater than -32, now if you think about it once again, greater than means below. So if ammo Y is below -32, then we want it to shift upwards out of the bottom. So yeah, anyways, now we want to switch colors. We want to switch colors because we're drawing foreground and background. The first thing we want to have is the foreground. Actually, you know what? I think I've got this mixed up. I think the lighter is actually the background. Let me fix that. So yeah, anyhow, sorry for my mistake. So you can see here that it changes colors to draw the foreground in a slightly darker shade of text. And that results in this sort of cool blended look. Alright, now the last thing we need to do is just go over sort of some extra stuff. So you see here we changed the universal color to 2. Now we're just drawing the foreground of everything. So we want to draw the foreground of the tutorial text. So here we're just moving bottom. Here we move top to bottom. Now we're moving bottom back up. So this is the tutorial text, and this is the score. And once again, we're updating the text. Well, here actually something a bit different happens. Update colors. So what this is doing is if we're not updating it, then we want to just set it at a default score. Fine, we already looked at that. But if we are updating it, have it flash white, draw color C white, and have it have the font change, which we already went over. And that should be everything in terms of going over stuff with the HUD. So, unless you have any other questions, this video has gone on for too long, so I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to attach this file along with the video in the description of the video so you can go through and read over it more. Anyways, thanks for watching. Have a nice night.